everybody, it's time for our next chapters on Terror at Bottle Creek. Here we go, get it the right way. I'm Mrs. Lapiani. Yesterday we did chapters 1 and 2, so today I'm going to try to do 3, 4, and possibly 5. So hang with me, we've got about 10 to 12 minutes worth of reading here. Dad killed the motor and we drifted quietly on the light water of Bottle Creek. I walked to the front of the boat, plugged in another spotlight, and gave it to Jim. Shine it up ahead of us, I told him. Look for orange eyes glowing on top of the water. Jim and Hoss both turned in their seats, and Jim began waving the light across the water and under the overhanging trees. I returned to the stern and sat in the jump seat beside Catfish and scratched him on the neck. Dad sat down in the chair behind the steering console and used the other spotlight to do his own searching. You boys ever heard of the Bottle Creek Indian mounds? Dad said. The men shook their heads, still studying the dark water. You get off in the woods to your right, and you'll run up on them, like Inca ruins back there. Jim turned and put his light on the trees, but there was nothing to see except the dense tangle of palmetto and vines and Spanish moss. Way out here, Jim said. About 700 years ago, Dad continued, ancestors of the Creek and Choctaw Indians came down from middle Alabama to build a city in the swamp. There's 18 mounds out there. They say there was thousands of Indians lived on top of them for hundreds of years. Then they all just disappeared. What happened? Hoss asked. Dad shrugged. I bring archaeologists out here sometimes from the University of South Alabama. They dig around and try to figure stuff out. Said maybe Hernando de Soto killed them. Maybe diseases. They don't know. I never heard of it, Jim said. Not many people have. It's too far in the middle of nowhere. No roads or nothing to get to it. Who owns this land? Jim said. U.S. government. There's an old metal sign back there saying it's a National Historic Landmark. 20 years ago, I brought the fellow out here to put it up. I figure that's the last time the government set foot in this place. The men kept staring at the trees, probably thinking about the mounds. I'd thought about the mounds enough, and I already knew plenty about alligators and just about everything else in the swamp. Instead, I wondered what my neighbor Liza Stovall was doing, probably out with her friends somewhere. She was in my same class at school. We rode the bus together in the mornings along with her six-year-old sister Francie. But Liza had a different life and different friends. Friends with real houses and places other than a giant dark swamp to go to on weekends. It didn't bother me as much as before Mom left. Now the thought of being left out was constantly on my mind. Better get your light on the water again, Dad said to the men. Around this bend we'll come up to a slough on the right. He ought to be there. A light breeze brushed the tops of the swamp canopy. I looked up and saw the leaves trembling and thought about the hurricane again. Thought of it hundreds of miles away. Even if it didn't hit us, if it just came anywhere close, we'd be working for days getting not only ourselves ready, but everybody else at the river landing. As the current took us around the bend, I saw the orange eyes reflecting in Dad's spotlight beam about 20 yards ahead. Catfish twitched and growled deep in his throat. I put my hand on his head. Easy, boy, I said to him. Dad switched the light off and set it on the floor. He'd seen the gator too, but he'd give his clients a chance to discover it for himself. Jim swung his beam over the creek, passing over the eyes once, then jerking the light back. I see something, Tom, he said. Dad stood up quietly. Keep it on there, he said. Yep, there he is, fellas. He's a big one, Hoss said. I told you, Dad said. Court, this is the first time we've got the name of the little boy in our story. We're in chapter 3 and just now getting the main character's name. Court, get the 22 out of the dry box and get it loaded. Hoss, grab that deep sea fishing rod behind you and stand on the bow with it. Jim, you keep the light on him. Hoss stepped onto the bow with the fishing rod. It was spooled with a 100-pound braided line and a weighted treble hook made for sharks. Those eyes are nearly a foot apart, Jim said. 10 inches was more accurate, each inch representing about a foot of body length, but Dad wasn't going to spoil their excitement. Cast that hook over his back, Dad said, then reel it slow and snag him. We going to reel him in? Jim asked.
No, but we'll wear him out, Dad said, then pull up to him. It was a strange way to hunt, but the hunting regulations required that the alligator be harpooned or snagged and secured against the gunnels before you could shoot it. He can't get in the boat, can he? Jim asked. He won't get in here, but don't stick your hand out after him. Our two clients didn't know much about alligator hunting, but they'd been sportsmen all their lives and knew how to cast a fishing rod. Hoss arched the treble hook down the creek and made an almost perfect cast just over the gator's neck. Then he reeled slow until the line was taut. Hit it, Dad said. Hoss yanked the line and the gator swirled the water and dove for the creek bottom. The fishing rod bowed and whined as the line spooled against the drag. Whoa, son, Hoss yelled as he leaned into the stream. Keep the light on that line, Dad said. We're just getting started. Chapter 4. Hoss strained and sweated against the alligator. At one point I had to go to the front of the boat and pour water in his mouth and over his head. He leaned into the fight for 30 more minutes before the gator surfaced again. By then we were 10 feet from the beast, ancient and black and smelling of fetid river mud. It only took a moment for him to see us and dive again, and then the bull towed us downstream for an hour while Hoss kept tension on the line and reeled when he could. When the gator eventually tired, he stopped swimming and settled on the creek bottom like a boulder. Hoss reeled steadily, and the line began to angle down as we pulled the boat toward it. Give me the light, Jim, Dad said. Court, pass him that rifle. You think he's done? Hoss grunted. He's about to be, Dad said. Jim passed the spotlight to Dad, and I chambered a round in the .22, made sure the safety was on, and handed it to Jim. Hoss took one hand off the rod and wiped his forehead with his shirt sleeve. Now listen up, Dad said. Here's what we're going to do. Hoss, you bow up on that rod and he'll come up next to the boat. When he does, Jim, and I mean as soon as you see him, you put that round right between his eyes. You got one shot. You hit him wrong and he's going to go nuts. Got it? Jim stared at the water and nodded. Go ahead, Hoss, Dad said. Lean back on it. Hoss got to his knees, leveraged the rod in his crotch, and started cranking. Dad held the light on the thin, dripping line disappearing into the murky creek. Slowly, the line began to quiver and rise. Safety's on, I said. Jim clicked the safety off, brought the rifle to his shoulder, and pointed the barrel at the water. The gator suddenly appeared out of the depths, rising like a black log beside us. Jim fired quickly, and the bull bucked and rolled. Hold it, Hoss, Dad yelled. The shot was a good one, and in a moment the gator hung limp next to us. All right, Dad said. Good shot, Jim. You back off and let us get a line around him. Court, get the rope. All right, Dad. Good shot, Jim. Oops. Excuse me. I was reading the same line again. I retrieved a coil of 3/4 nylon line out of the dry box. I squeezed past Hoss, leaned over the gunnels, and started running it under the gator's neck. The moment my fingers brushed the scaly hide, No Name erupted. He bucked and twisted his head, and I smelled his rotten breath and saw 100 yellow teeth, dripping teeth, in my face. I was already falling backwards when the tremendous jaws slammed shut inches from my shoulder. Hey, son, Dad yelled. What the heck are you doing? I lay on the cold aluminum deck, breathing hard, my mind racing and tangled with confusion. Dad yanked the rope out of my hands. You want to get yourself killed? Hoss strained on the line, waiting for the gator to settle again. Dad stood over me, staring down at me like he wanted to make sure I was still alive. Dad let out a deep sigh. Lord, he said, you know better than to dive in there like that. I didn't have anything to say. I did know better. A reptile's reflexes lasted long after it's dead. You can't assume anything. He all right? Jim asked. Dad nodded and turned away from me. I could see he was shaken up as well. Yeah, he's all right. Everybody just hold what you got and take a minute. I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. Now more than ever, I didn't want to be out there killing stupid alligators with 2 men from Mississippi we barely knew. I just wanted to go home and go to bed. After a moment, I got off the deck and went to sit beside Catfish in the stern. I stroked my dog's back while Dad and the 2 men secured No Name. It was midnight before they had the gator fully lashed to the side of the John and we started the slow haul back to the boat landing. Jim and Hoss popped more beer and celebrated and seemed to forget all about my close call. Dad steered us slowly through the dark, cheeping swamp, in his mind on something. Whether it was on me or Mom, I couldn't tell. Chapter 5. 10 o'clock the next morning, I heard Dad get up and make coffee. I lay on my back for a while, staring at the yellow water stains on the ceiling, thinking about the giant alligator mouth. When I heard Dad step outside, I climbed down off my bunk, pulled on my clothes, and went into the kitchen. I saw him through the window, standing on the back deck, looking over the river. I went to the counter and turned on our small portable television. I watched the storm on the news, looking like an enormous saw blade spinning over the Gulf. Landfall was predicted sometime on Monday, with the cone of probability centered on Biloxi, Mississippi. That was nearly 100 miles southwest of us, but it was only Saturday, and there was still plenty of time for it to change course. I turned off the television and got a box of Raisin Bran out of the cupboard and poured it into a bowl. I was walking to the refrigerator for milk when Dad came through the door again. He went to the coffee maker and poured another cup. "Hurricane's headed for Mississippi right now," I said. He took a sip of coffee and rubbed his eyes. "Yeah?" he said. "You want to see it?" He studied me for a moment like more than one thing was going on in his head. "No," he said. "I guess it'll do whatever it's going to do." Dad leaned against the counter and took another sip. He was still thinking about something else. "You know, you almost got your arm bit off last night," he said. I looked at the floor. "I know," I said. "I mean, what was that all about?" I shrugged. "You got to always be thinking out in that swamp. It's a pretty place, but you pull back the curtain and it gets evil real quick. Understand?" "Yes, sir." He took another sip of his coffee and said, "Good." "Figure we ought to start getting things ready," I said. He didn't answer me. "Dad?" "We got time," he said. "I need to run some errands." "How long you going to be gone?" He got his cap off the nail on the wall and slipped it on. "I don't know," he said. "I'll be back after a while." I finished my cereal and went outside up into the dirt parking lot above the riverbank. Catfish swung in beside me and I knelt next to him. I rubbed his head as I ran my eyes over the landing. The property consisted of about 5 acres gently sloping down to the river. At the top of the hill was the Stovall's 3-bedroom brick house. Their family had owned the property since the Civil War. Some of the giant moss-draped live oaks were even rumored to have been planted by their ancestors. Just downhill from the house was a storage shed, a bait shop, and a grass parking area. Part of the parking lot was used as a boat yard when customers left their boats on the trailer for free. Below that was the launching ramp and a steel money box where they could shove $5 through a slot and put their boats in. Beside the ramp were 2 rows of covered stalls where some paid $25 monthly to leave their boats in the water. For 7 years I'd lived in the same houseboat, moored at the same spot on the south end of the property. 5 years ago Mr. Stovall had died of cancer, and ever since then Dad had maintained the grounds in return for free rent. The work mostly consisted of keeping the grass mowed, but we had also made repairs when they were needed. When the river got high, it sometimes tore out the catwalks. The north wind usually blew sheet tin off the roof of the boat stalls. Twice a year we hauled in gravel to fix the muddy spots in the road. Outside of these basic chores, we helped people launch their boats and clean their fish and wild game. The place felt like it was ours, but all we really owned was the houseboat and the john tied to the back of it. Dad used to talk about building a real house when Mom was around, mostly because he knew that's what she wanted to hear. Mrs. Stovall even offered to sell him a half acre up the hill, but Dad had enough problems just paying the bills he already had. There was not much money in being a river guide. With Mom, it was always about the money, even though she was too lazy to work for it herself. She wanted Dad to change. She wanted him to leave the river and move down into town and get a normal job that paid more. Even I knew that was impossible. The swamp ran in his blood all the way back to our Creek Indian ancestors. Taking the river away from him would be like taking a farm from a farmer.